Factual Reset, a podcast brought to you by the New Political Economy Initiative at IIT Bombay. From India's industrial shifts to lessons from the world over, our host for the season, Srinivasan Iyer, is unpacking the historical blueprints, the breakthroughs, and the contemporary bold lessons that reset our thinking on the economy.
We have with us Professor Nagaraj, who for several years was teaching and researching at the Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research. Thank you very much, Professor Nagaraj, for joining this interview. Let's begin with how you would define the phrase industrial policy for the purpose of this interview.
Thank you for this invitation to talk to you. I would define industrial policy for this interview as the following. Industrial policy are a set of interrelated policies intended to enable domestic firms to acquire capabilities to compete in the global market efficiently. It goes beyond first principles of economics of subsidies and tariffs, but it is to enable firms to acquire dynamic comparative advantage to meet the global challenges of tomorrow.
Against such a definition, what are some of the key industrial policy instruments that you see being used in India today, either at the center or the states or elsewhere?
Yeah, in my reading, most of the prominent industrial policy followed in India today is mostly subsidizing, say, production of certain products which are currently being imported. And this is used in conjunction with rising import duties on many products. So it is essentially a policy of infant industry protection to give temporary or static comparative advantage to domestic manufacturers. This only can have a limited or a short-term advantage, and it's unlikely to create dynamic comparative advantage, which we should be seeking in the long-term development of the nation. So I would think that the present policies are not adequately suitable for the purpose of industrializing India or overcoming the deindustrialization which we are currently facing, in my view.
Do you want to describe more specifically the kind of policies? You've written extensively, for example, in the public sector. You've written extensively about financing of industry. So would you also want to reflect upon whether those tools are being used today in India?
I feel that there are lots of very promising pronouncements by the ruling the policy makers, but on the ground reality, the policy which seems to be in operation, which is being widely applied, seems to be basically tariff protection and subsidy. And therefore, which is, in my view, as I stated earlier, is inadequate. We need to go beyond this. We need to have a set of interrelated policies beyond tariffs and subsidies to achieve our long-term goals of industrializing a nation. And here, the policies I would like to emphasize is providing long-term finance and promoting investments which give long-term returns. And I am agnostic about public sector, in the sense I am not ideologically wedded to for public sector or against public sector. But I would think public sector as an instrument of industrial policy should be used where the nation's interests are involved, where time taken for achieving results are short, uh, and where the achieving quick results are in the national interest. So I believe in the Deng Xiaoping's principle that I am not bothered about the color of the cat, but as long as it catches the mice.
Thank you. In today's contemporary global situation, whether it is a globally fragmented production, the more recent, in fact, turn to friendshoring or strategic interests of the global north, the geographical location of globally dominant firms, lead firms, which exercise an undue influence on the distribution of value in the global chain, as well as technology transfers across borders, or other such conditions, including the nature of technological development, the unfolding of technology, is it scale neutral or not? Under these conditions, do you think India's current industrial policy is capable of delivering on what it has identified as its outcomes?
There, I'm seriously concerned that the current policies followed for industrial development do not seem adequate for the purpose at hand. We require as far more strategic thinking. The world over, there is a revival of interest in industrial policies, starting with the US, and though it may not be called industrial policy, but it is many other policies are implemented with the same purpose in hand, to promote domestic capabilities, promote domestic competitiveness of domestic firms in the global scale, global scene. In that situation, I find that while there has been a considerable discussion on what India should be doing, but on the ground, not much has been done to promote industrialization beyond the tariffs and the subsidy policy we followed. I really am really concerned that the world is moving ahead with a variety of industrial policies, such as R&D policy, R&D investments, technology policy, and public investment in various guises in the name of environment. Okay, but we in India seem to be still sticking to first principles of tariffs and subsidies, and we need to think much bigger and much more clearly on many of those issues, as many developed countries are doing right now.
In fact, you have written about the contribution of some large public sector enterprises to technological development in India, particularly in the infrastructure sector or in the heavy industry sector. We are also aware of the early phases of the Indian pharmaceutical industry, which stood to benefit a lot and made India the pharmacy of the world because of a tailored patent regime. Similarly, if you look at the automobile sector, there was a set of policies beyond just subsidy, because all of these had, in return for state support, a reciprocal requirement of at least some form of technological transformation. Do you think any of that is needed, or something similar is needed in this era, where it's important for India, as you initially said, to actually ride to the technological front on several counts?
I agree. We require to relook or reinvent many of the policies we followed earlier, which gave the country good dividends. I'm not saying that we should go back to permit license Raj, which is a caricature of the earlier regime, but there were many elements of success which need to be appreciated and understood, and carefully seen how many of them can be modified to suit our present requirement. And you rightly said, introduction of Maruti Udyog in India as a way to modernize the automobile passenger car industry in India was a sign of success. So it not only got license to, gave license to a Japanese company to manufacture in India, but along with this license, it also encouraged or incentivized Suzuki to bring with it technology and related first year ancillaries. So they bring in the entire technological ecosystem in India and form joint ventures with Indian manufacturers. And in a short span of 5 to 7 years, India became a competitive producer of small cars in the world. So we require to think how similar strategies could be adopted in the currently required technologies such as chip manufacturing or electronics hardware, etc. So we need to relook at how the successful strategies of the past could be reinvented or modified to meet our current situation. And of course, we have to be cautious that we don't make the mistakes we made in the past.
Thank you. There was also an impression in India's sort of broader economic policy of the past, say, 20, 25 years, that India could leapfrog beyond the manufacturing era into the services era. There seems to be some rethinking about that in recent times, spurred by various criteria. What do you think? Do you think that a robust and a vibrant manufacturing sector continues to be important in India, or can India just serve as the office of the world, as was thought 20 years ago, and that could take India to the next century?
Yeah, I think India made a strategic mistake by completely ignoring or even decimating the emerging electronics hardware sector in the early 90s, when India got onto this software industry, which was booming at that time. It was correct in a way that India did not want to miss the bus of software opportunity, software export opportunity. So, in a sense, that was right at that moment. Policymakers gave all possible help to ensure that we get onto the software IT outsourcing bandwagon. Okay. However, there were enough indications even at that time that we must not put all our eggs in the same one basket of software development, but we require for a holistic development of the industry, we require hardware as well. But unfortunately, policymakers of the time felt that software would enable us to become the back office of the world, and that would in turn help us to acquire related competencies. But that, with hindsight, proved to be a short-sighted policy. And today we realize that India has become a completely import-dependent economy on hardware, and not only that, it is a strategic mistake, as India has become dependent on China for most of these products. So I think it is high time that India make corrections, and here I believe that there could be a substantial role for public sector in reviving the hardware or electronics hardware manufacturing industries. How exactly it is to be done will have to be worked out in detail. But here I find that India needs to reimagine some of the positives of India's earlier policy of emphasis on capital goods, and work on the on the successes to see how we can re-energize our capital goods sector, and which today means essentially electronics good industries.
Thank you. We just shift a bit to another issue that you worked on, which is foreign direct investment. It's currently held that foreign direct investment is crucial, almost sufficient, for India to significantly improve its productive capabilities. And to that extent, you have a lot of investment, which at least in public eye is tailored towards getting more foreign direct investment here. What are your reflections on India's experience with FDI over the past decade or more?
Yeah, I think there is a disconnect between the popular perception and the hard reality of numbers. I have been working on this. I have written about it, and it shows that our foreign direct investment in net terms as a percentage of GDP has stagnated around 1.5% of GDP. When I say net, it is because gross includes disinvestment by private equity firms which exit the country and company after 3 to 5 years. So, when you consider the exits and consider what is FDI remaining in India as a percentage of the domestic output, it has stagnated around 1.5% of GDP. And even within this, 70% of it comes from private equity, hedge funds, and venture capital. These alternative investment funds do not make investments in greenfield sites. They acquire existing firms, factories, and brands. Therefore, such investments do not add to productive capabilities of the country. And therefore, I have serious reservations about the way we have promoted FDI in India. I mean, just as a comparison, China, even to this date, does not allow 100% FDI firms in manufacturing. And they always they go out of the way to encourage joint ventures, so that idea is to promote domestic production and domestic capabilities. Unfortunately, we have forgotten that objective, and today FDI inflow is merely seen as an item to balance the balance of payment deficit. So this change in perspective has cost India seriously. Because the FDI is no more seen as a way of augmenting domestic capabilities, but merely managing the balance of payment. So I think we need to refocus FDI on creating or augmenting domestic capabilities.
If we shift from the more sort of mainstream objective of industrial policy, which is transforming India's industrial structure or India's economic structure to make it more globally productive, to some more domestic objectives such as employment. We are all aware that the jobs challenge is a significant challenge in democratic India. Would you want to reflect on the nature of industrial policy that's required to make our manufacturing more job rich?
I fully share your concern about manufacturing. Indian manufacturing sector has lost jobs during more than a decade now. And I have written about it. India has deindustrialized, not just in terms of stagnation of share of manufacturing output, but loss of employment in manufacturing and a rise in employment in agricultural sector. So these are clear signs of deindustrialization. And if we really want to augment employment, I think one route, which is a classical route which has remained, which persists with us, is augmenting manufacturing employment in labor-intensive industries. And very often, critics would argue that India has lost the capacity, or the world is no more that labor-intensive that we need that we can follow that strategy. I think this is completely false. We can see in front of our own eyes that countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh have augmented have augmented domestic manufacturing capabilities, and they have moved up the ladder of industrialization by creating large-scale employment. So there is no reason why India cannot do the same. At the same time, I would like to caution that India is not Bangladesh or India is not Vietnam. India's industrial policy will have many more complex objectives and more, but employment objective can still be pursued if we augment labor-intensive industrialization. And I would say even before we go there, even if we reclaim our manufacturing for domestic production, domestic consumption, like if we reduce our import dependence on import dependence, that itself would create a fair amount of employment. So since we have not focused on manufacturing employment and we have pursued import, but domestic consumption at any cost, and therefore we have forgotten the manufacturing employment objective, and this can be reclaimed, in my view, fairly easily if we reconfigure our industrial policy towards employment.
In fact, you have put together a series of studies recently, some of which is sectoral, on industrial policy, studying specific manufacturing sectors. So does that give you optimism that you can design a set of policies which could revive some of those sectors which could create so many more jobs?
Yes, in fact, we initiated those studies precisely to figure out what is happening on the ground and how are there clear signs of signs of revival of industries. And we did find that gives me optimism that if we carefully tailor our small industry policy or MSME policies suited for specific locations and clusters, and reviving the industrial support at the local level, I think many of the industries, many of the small industries can be revived and they can become internationally competitive. I think the best example we found in our case studies was the case of tile manufacturing in Morbi in Gujarat. This is an industry which was completely wiped out by Chinese imports about a decade ago, but with careful support of the state government in terms of supply of gas, uninterrupted gas supply, uninterrupted electricity supply, and an excellent infrastructure from the town to the nearest port, that is Kandla, the industry has been able to revive significantly, and today it exports 40 to 50% of its output to Middle Eastern countries. So that gives me optimism that what is required is not grand infrastructure building at the national level, but also tailoring infrastructure to meet the local requirement and the last mile requirements for industrial revival.
So in a sense, this industrial policy went way beyond what you began with, which is just tariffs and subsidies. This goes beyond, this is strategic, there are elements there which respond to very, very local conditions, and there is the involvement of both the municipal and the state governments.
Absolutely, absolutely. This is where going beyond the national objective of creating highways, but highways need to be connected to the local supply, local production units or production locations, so that they can take the goods to the market. So unless you have the last mile connectivity, last mile connections in every respect, not just roads, but electricity, gas and water, etc. Unless all these connectivities are built up, which are not very expensive, which can be built and which can be done very quickly. If that is done, I am sure a lot of labor-intensive manufacturing can be revived in this country.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.